According to them, it was a minor procedure, so I shouldn't be worried. "Rachel, don't make this dramatic," was all my mom urged via FaceTime, while I lay in a chilly hospital bed on Christmas Eve, hardly able to breathe due to the agony ripping through my abdomen. "We've gotten boarding underway. Just so you know, Billy Joel doesn't perform annually." My insides were gushing blood. When my twins were 2 years old, a nurse brought them some crayons and told them to color on the floor of the hospital. My parents were getting on a plane to Los Angeles, and I was terrified that I wouldn't make it through the night as a concert goer, that which they patiently anticipated for months. Something inside me broke when I got that call. This was something I had been putting together for years via blind loyalty and recurring payments. My monthly payment to them has been $3,000 for the past 3 years. Mortgage payment, paying for their food, they take care of their lake cottage, all while taking care of our 2 young children on my alone following my husband's tragic death in a car crash. They mysteriously disappeared just when I needed them most, right when I was facing the prospect of emergency surgery without someone to watch my children. I had pled with them to provide a hand, claimed to have no other options. They showed no reaction at all. "Without fail, Rachel, you're in need of something," my dad had whispered. "You are draining." As I hung up that phone call, I can still feel my hands shaking. More than terror, I felt. I was embarrassed, anger. The agony in my body was overshadowed by an overwhelming feeling of betrayal. At that very second, what was to be done became clear to me. I hushed the nurse and asked, "Could you please bring me my phone again?" The automatic bank transfer to my parents was discontinued with just a few keystrokes. After that, I mustered up the nerve to send a message I had always feared sending. "My financial assistance for you will end immediately. I expect more from my children. Stay away from me." Their reaction was a mystery to me. I was indifferent. I was no longer their daughter, and that was a first for me. The mother of my children was I. I had had enough of being their fall guy. The streets outside of St. Mary's Medical Center were covered in peaceful white layers as snow began to fall hard in Denver. As I lay on my back in the emergency department, illuminated by the antiseptic lights, I could just make out the sound of my twin daughters' gentle breaths. They were cradled close to me, their playthings consisting of a battered plush giraffe and a toy fire engine. The night before Christmas, my first solo performance, he planted a gentle kiss on my forehead 6 months ago as he left to get almond milk and diapers, and never returned. All of that changed in the span of 3 seconds when an intoxicated semi-truck driver ran a red light. Every breath since then has been heavier. It seemed like an eternity. And I was a widow at the age of 34, a woman raising her 2 children on her alone. At this point in time, while they await urgent surgical procedures, I tried to reheat mac and cheese for the kids that afternoon when I fainted on the kitchen floor, but I had ignored the ache in my lower belly for days, thinking it was stress or sadness. Out of sheer terror, I dialed 911. Emergency medical technicians suspected internal hemorrhage or a burst ovarian cyst. Something wasn't going to be patient. The nurses did their utmost to reassure me as they rolled me through triage. However, I was unable to focus on myself. My body was completely out of my mind. The only thing on my mind was, there were Liam and Lily. My operation is tonight, and I don't have someone to watch my kids. What would happen if there was an error? What would happen to them if I were to pass out? My parents were the last remaining choice. I was hesitant to give them a call. I had hoped to avoid hearing my parents' weary sarcasm, or my mom's voice, which combines duty and irritation. However, my time had ran out of options. It was then that I made the call. Someone answered the phone with a ring. "Rachel, not now, we're boarding," my mom eventually replied, grinning. "Oh, Billy Joel. Do you recall this has been on our minds for months?" Despite the excruciating agony, I mustered up the courage to say, "Mom." Now I find myself at the emergency room. Internal bleeding is their suspected cause. Oh no, I must get surgery. Would someone kindly remove the twins from me? A heavy sigh escaped her lips. Gave a real sigh. "Rachel, this is nothing new for you. It's true. You're not alone in having a life. Not from the blood, but from the way her remarks cut me like a knife through butter." From behind her, my father spoke, saying, "She's just being theatrical again. Linda, hurry up. We're about to miss our flight." After then, the call ended. Yes, they hung, stand up. With a pulse rate that was higher than the monitors adjacent to me, I fixated on the screen. The excruciating agony in my belly was hard to put a finger on. Or when it hit me that my parents wouldn't even be able to see the first act if I died on this table tonight. As I lay there under the buzzing fluorescent lights, a deluge of memories, those I had fought for years to put to rest, cracked my will to stay alive. When you're in pain, everything seems to come crashing down. Another pain, this one much older, crept into my chest as the internal fires of my body became hotter. I was always inadequate. No way, not for my folks, on one occasion only. I learned at a young age that I was invisible in my 2-story brick home in Columbus, Ohio, with blue shutters and a yard that my dad was very proud of. Kelsey, my younger sister, was perfect. They looked forward to her as the bright future, since she was the perfect student cheerleader and golden kid. I was the one who dared to be different, and I ended up paying the price. My dad exclaimed, "Third, that's pretty low," when I brought home the ribbon for 3rd place at the 4th grade science fair. So, was it better for 2 people? My mother didn't even glance up from her magazine when I successfully obtained my driver's license on my very first attempt. But remember when Kelsey figured out how to broil popcorn in the microwave? They really had a little party for her. Sometime around my senior year of high school, I gave up trying. Every move was familiar to me. Whatever I achieved, it would pale in comparison to the brilliance of anything Kelsey touched. A cherry red convertible, adorned with a white bow, was her new ride for her 16th birthday. I took out the insurance on my cousin's ancient Honda that had 160,000 miles on it. They sent a card when I graduated from college, summa cum laude, by the way. No contact. Absence of a visit. Why, the reason behind this is that everyone was too excited to focus on anything else when Kelsey got her commercial break that weekend for a special toothpaste brand. My nuptials to Mike were also meaningless. Yes, we did invite them. Their arrival was imminent. Raised an objection to the meal. Because they felt it was too far from home, they departed early from the venue. Our initial dance was overlooked. I had my first inkling that Liam and Lily would see me for the first time, on the day I gave birth to them, that they would see my kids and know that I was important to them, that despite never having been poured into, I'd created something lovely. Just once did they show up. I held the twins for 5 minutes. Someone mentioned that I seemed exhausted. The reason for their departure was that the infants were too noisy. It didn't stop me from trying, though. During holidays, I continued to call. After that, I continued sending them birthday presents in the mail. Their announcement of early retirement and need for a little help came 3 years ago, and I didn't hesitate to accept their call. $3,000 on a monthly basis without fail. While I struggled to make ends meet after Mike passed away, I worked 2 jobs and sold off some of our funds. I knew, nevertheless, in my heart, it wasn't love that drove me to give. Hope did. I clung to the hope that maybe they might eventually come around if I kept them in the dark for long enough. Rather doing that, they picked a concert and left me bleeding on a hospital bed. In an instant, every recollection, every overlooked birthday, every scathing comment, every forgotten achievement felt like a prologue. Were we the only ones who hadn't anticipated the inevitable conclusion? It felt like this scene had been scripted for ages. The curtain in my hospital room tapped softly when someone gently knocked on it. With a calm and determined look on her face, Nurse Bethany entered the room. I just spoke with Claire on the phone, Rachel. In half an hour, she will be by your side. She is fantastic with children and has experience working in pediatric trauma care. It will be all right. The medication just slightly dulled the edges of the agony ripping through my abdomen as I dozed gently, not because they said anything comforting or nice, but because they said nothing. I could still hear my parents' words echoing in my head. Their decision had been finalized, and now it was my turn to decide. Is that Bethany? My throat was dry and tight, so I muttered in a harsh voice, "Please, could you redeliver my phone to me?" With consideration for my personal space, she placed it delicately in my palm and moved away. I jiggled my fingers nervously to access my banking app. The planned transfer, which is $3,000 and is scheduled to go out on the 1st of every month without fail, had my thumb positioned over it. That sum held my attention, that emblem of unwavering devotion. I had voluntarily worn the leash. It was subsequently canceled by me. I severed the connection in an instant. However, it fell short. Forget it. I checked my messages sent by SMS. Sweat coated my palms, and my pulse raced with a tumultuous blend of excitement, rage, and sadness. Because I wanted each word to be significant, I typed slowly. I am thus terminating my financial support for you effective right this second. Being an afterthought is not good enough for my children and myself. End any further communications with me. I paused for a while, staring at the message before finally hitting submit. I felt an odd serenity descend upon me. The sensation is similar to plunging into icy water, shocking, abrupt, and purifying all at once. My whole life I had been told that setting limits was a sign of being betrayed. Being selfish meant saying no to loved ones. It meant giving up your time, energy, money, and even yourself in order to be a good daughter. My role had evolved beyond that of a daughter. Yes, I was a mom. Nobody was going to respect my children's needs while insisting on being prioritized. Just as Bethany had promised, Claire showed there at the appointed time. An instant rapport with Liam and Lily, a soothing voice, and a kind grin. She had them both laughing out loud in no time at all. After she taught them how to fold paper into boats and gave them stickers. Leaning closer, Bethany said, "She's the best. Money isn't an issue at the moment. Things will become clear after the operation." In an attempt to express my gratitude, my voice quivered. Reason being, I finally received support after all these years. Not because I owed them anything, the reason being that I was the one who paid them, only because they were concerned. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time in that delicate moment. hooked up to IVs with my heart monitor quietly buzzing beside me. Power. Spent more than 3 hours in the operating room. The antiseptic light in the hospital room distorted my vision when I awoke drowsy and in pain. I remained conscious, but I felt frail. Each inhalation was labored. I felt a dagger pierce my belly with each motion. The loss of my parents, though, was the most devastating. Skip the call. No one texted to see whether I was okay. Absolutely nothing. Rather than that, I got a deluge of text messages and 27 missed calls from them. None of them, however, asked, "Are you all right? How are the children doing?" Among other things they said, "What gives with this idea of separating us? The mortgage wasn't approved, the bank just contacted. Dude, you gotta solve it. Our January payment for the cruise has already been made. Rachel, it is non-refundable." Incredulous, I gazed at the words. They were more concerned with taking a vacation to the Bahamas than with the intricate stitches that held my body together. Kelsey then extended her hand. She conveyed a distinct message. "You got a checkup according to Mom and Dad. Are they really going ballistic about money now? What's happening?" It was as if a light went out. No, they had lied about me in addition to abandoning me. They assured Kelsey it was insignificant. My previous melodramatic behavior was an exception. I was guilting them over a minor appointment, they said. Therefore, I was honest with her. No tale spared. The agony, a last-minute operation, the sick bay on Christmas Eve. As I confronted the prospect of my own mortality, the twins coloring serenely in one corner, her response was lightning fast. I was completely unaware, Rachel. If only I had known, I would have gone. With the kids, I would have gone. God, I'm sorry. Nothing was shown to me. I was confused about what to believe for a second. Something became clear to me, though, as I read her texts, which were filled with bewilderment, rage, and remorse. In no way was Kelsey harsh. Just like me, she grew up with our family. Throughout her whole life, she had been told that she was exceptional, whereas I was constantly told that I wasn't. Perhaps the fissures were beginning to show to her now. My folks, though, their bet was doubled. They arrived at my residence the next day. Claire had already taken the kids back for the night, and I was still in the midst of my recuperation, so I wasn't even home yet. In their rush, they scrawled the following message on my door. "Hey, we need have a chat. I think you're being too demanding. Please don't force us to tell anyone else in the family about this." It was done. By the time the sun went down that day, every single one of my relatives had received an email from my dad. He went on a lengthy tirade accusing me of having abandoned them, cut them off in their time of need, and used surgery as an excuse to withhold support, all while painting me as icy, curious but without appreciation, completely careless. What did he leave out? I was recuperating from a last-minute surgical procedure. In regards to their sole grandson, they had flat-out declined assistance. I was barely living, and for 3 years I had been paying their expenses. A campaign of smears was waged, a disguised tantrum. However, something had slipped their minds. I am. They couldn't guilt me into quiet because I wasn't the same daughter they knew. I was completely out of options. Plus, I now had allies who were prepared to back me up. There was no straight path to recovery, but I made it. After surgery, the first several weeks were a whirlwind of pain medication, doctor appointments, and leisurely strolls around my apartment, while Claire reassured Liam and Lily to use their inside voices, and cautioned me against lifting anything heavier than a juice box. Grasping a blanket or moving too swiftly caused a throbbing in my belly. When contrasted with the burdens I had previously carried, disappointment duty, and the feeling of being invisible, this anguish seemed almost intentional. The process of reconstruction was underway. I am talking about my life and health here. A nanny was no longer Claire's only role in life. She was my anchor. So that I could get some rest, she remained the night the first several days. Putting the twins' toys in their proper places, she went to work. They nearly passed out from laughing so hard at her antics. The children adored her, and I couldn't help but feel the same way, a quiet adoration for someone who bravely faces the blazing ruins of your life head on. It was heartwarming to see how sympathetic my graphic design clients were. After I explained the issue, most of them were willing to work with me and even sent flowers. I finally felt free of the pressure to live up to standards I had never established. Enough room for me to breathe. A turning point eventually arrived. After Mike's burial, I created a tribute website while sobbing quietly at my laptop. I stumbled into it when I accessed one of my old project files. Included were pictures of him, a song he liked, and a place for his friends to share tales about him on a message board. After putting it away for months, I looked at it with a new appreciation for the time, effort, and care that went into making it. It had an untamed beauty to it. I couldn't help but think, what if this could be useful to someone else? I contacted a few of people in the online bereavement support group that Bethany had put me in touch with. I put up an example and asked if anyone wanted a place to remember a loved one. Everyone was really impressed. I received 5 commissions in the span of a week. I had more work coming in than I could manage on my own during the first month. I found purpose again when designing monuments which had been absent for a long time, celebrating actual people's lives rather than merely making nice stuff for anonymous businesses. While I was healing, I helped other people heal. After the stress of worrying about money subsided, I took stock of my alternatives. Even when it was smaller and less organized, my flat never felt like home. I had hurriedly picked up this place after Mike passed away just because it was within my budget. Now that I wasn't giving my parents $3,000 every month, I had the freedom to dream greater. Then I met Diana. She was a real estate agent witty and a fellow widow in the support group. 2 years prior to her husband's death from cancer, she was left with a 3-year-old and many unanswered concerns about life. Our connection was instantaneous. The market was assessed with Diana's assistance. I was surprised to see that my apartment had more equity than I had anticipated. In little over 2 months, she assisted me in closing on a charming 3-bedroom home situated in a welcoming area just outside of Portland, perfect for families. A swing set that someone had abandoned a little yard, and windows that allowed the sun's rays paint the hardwood floors like a watercolor were all features of this house. On the day we moved in, our neighbors dropped by freshly baked bread lasagna and cards written by hand. That night I sobbed for an unidentified reason rather than grief. Perhaps it was tranquilly. For the first time in my life, I was able to put down roots without seeking permission from anybody else. Perhaps that was it. Children possessed a yard. I was a homeowner. Still, Claire lent a hand on occasion. Weekend visits allowed Kelsey to get to know her niece and nephew better. She stopped defending our parents and started showing up when I needed her, asking how I was doing and listening. It wasn't a sudden or miraculous event that altered my life. Rather, it was the decision to stop being a doormat for other people and start being my own rock. It wasn't a return to form. This was the first step. The doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon. The bell rang when Claire took the twins out for errands, and I was in the middle of creating a memorial site slideshow. I took a quick look at my phone's live stream, and I felt sick to my stomach. They were right there, my folks, asleep on my brand new porch like specters of a past I'd long since laid to rest. Clutching a manila folder, my father stood tall in his trademark khakis and polished tee. With her arms crossed and her luxury purse dangling from her wrist like a badge of mistaken pride, my mother stood alongside him. Open the door I nearly did not. Unfortunately, my insatiable curiosity won out. Just enough for me to meet their gaze, I cracked it. "Just tell me," with an air of calm authority, I inquired. My mom put on an act. "We simply want to chat, Rachel, my darling. It's been quite a while." Adding, "We're worried." My dad's voice wavered between fury and desperate. "Nothing has prompted a response from you. We are not even allowed to visit the children." "Are you referring to the children who you declined to care for during my emergency surgery?" They both recoiled in surprise, and unlike before, they were caught off guard. My dad held out the folder and groaned. "Hey, something's wrong, financially. We are in desperate need of your assistance." My gaze fixed on him. "I have already been of assistance. I worked for 3 years. I was grieving the loss of my spouse while caring for my 2 young children. Could you tell me how you spent that sum?" His gaze averted. My mom dove right in. "Investments were made by us. I took out a second mortgage. We thought everything would be okay." Supposed I was going to keep footing the cost indefinitely. My temper flared and I exploded. With confidence, she took the next step forward. "Rachel, the house is going to be lost." I said the words, "sell the boat," without second thoughts. He tensed up. My dad, "It would be devastating for us." "Then you should sell the timeshare." "The market's terrible," my mom said, as she avoided looking at me. Both of them held my gaze. "You didn't come here to apologize then," keeping in mind that you should not inquire about my health, so as to avoid seeing the twins. "But you're going to ask for money while showing me a spreadsheet." The folder was opened by my father, who then moved it toward me. Inside was a detailed accounting of their debt, including $144,000 in overdue mortgage payments, a mountain of credit card bills, and accumulating late penalties. "We require assistance," he whispered. I fought back tears of laughter. "Tell me, what have you done for me specifically?" I let the question dangle in the air as I asked. They moved awkwardly but said nothing. At that very moment, Claire's automobile came into the driveway. Liam sprinted forward with his arms spread like airplane wings, while Lily clung to her pink giraffe as the twins plummeted out. They looked at my parents as if they were complete strangers. For more than a year, they hadn't laid eyes on those kids. "Behold, those are..." My mom let out a gasp, her voice rising to a sweet high pitch. "Behold my darling daughter." Curious Lily gave her a sidelong glance. I took a step ahead of her. "Absolutely not. Nobody knows who you are. Because you wanted it. You can't just erase your parents." My father began, his voice growing harsh. "Rachel, I won't delete you." "I'm remembering you accurately," I whispered sharply, but with conviction. "Help," I pleaded with you. "You possessed theater tickets." I pleaded one again. "You went on a cruise." "The bank won't wait," you say, and you implore me to help. A shadow fell over him. "Why is this happening?" "No," I reply. "It's the results." They departed without uttering a word. They came again the following day, accompanied by more soldiers. At this point, my Aunt Carol, the self-proclaimed family peacemaker, was standing at the entrance. She pounded on the door with the same syrupy tone she used whenever she wanted to coerce someone into doing what she wanted. What a burden on your parents, my darling. You are aware that they are simply terrible with money. They were able to pay their bills for 35 years before I began doing it for them, I stated coolly. They made the decision to retire early. This way of life was their choice. I refused to fix it. She hesitated. On the other hand, my family, when she started to say yes, I quietly interrupted her. When you're sick and bleeding in the hospital, your true family will show there. Not just when all of their available credit has been used. Later that night, my inbox was flooded with a fresh group email. This time it was my father. It was an attempt to tarnish my reputation among my relatives as a final resort. They say I was vengeful and nasty because I left them after everything they'd sacrificed. Yet the reality, last summer he couldn't remember how many people had seen them show off their new boat. My cousin Marcus is an employee at the bank, where they went bankrupt, yet he completely overlooked this fact. Unfortunately, he failed to remember that there are some of us who engage in meaningful conversation. Hours later, responses began to flood in. I have some questions, conflicting opinions, outrage, and then nothing. Their legend was beginning to fall apart. It wasn't because my screams were louder, rather I chose to remain silent this time. I was convinced by the evidence. At last, someone was paying attention. While preparing grilled cheese for the twins, 3 weeks subsequent to that email deluge, Kelsey gave me a call. She sounded quite contrite. Fishes received notice of foreclosure. I stopped stirring as the butter hissed on the stovetop. Has it already? Without the ability to pay the entire sum, the bank has given them 60 days to evacuate. She hesitated. They're very terrified, Rachel. Total breakdown. I remained silent. I only observed the cheese as it bubbled and slightly burned around the edges. They're completely out of options, she chimed in. Retirement funds depleted, bills paid in full. We lost the boat. For less than half of what they spent, the timeshare eventually sold. Let me guess, I whispered. I am being asked to fix it. A lengthy pause followed. At long last, Kelsey spoke up. I'm not saying you should. I figured you would be curious, so I told you. My phone went off later that night, but this time it was messages that weren't even attempting to be false anymore. It was almost like a desperate confession in my mom's message. We were surprised that you would genuinely disconnect from us. After you calmed down, we expected everything to return to normal. We are terrified, please. Feeling terrorized, the same individuals who abandoned me in a hospital bed, terrified and all alone, were now afraid they would lose their home. It was my duty to experience contentment, justification perhaps. However, I was actually exhausted, quite exhausted really, because seeking vengeance has shifted the focus. Clarity was the key. They were the same. There would be no other choice for them. They thought I would choose their comfort over my own sanity at all times, even in a crisis. Reasoning would be trumped by that guilt. Duty was what that family represented, regardless of the expense. That person was no longer me, though. As a mother, I had weathered a funeral surgery betrayal and the crushing weight of perpetual second-class citizenship. It would have been stronger if I had rebuilt it. Everyone from Claire and Diana to my clients and the parents in the mourning group, even Kelsey. Those people were now my family, united not by blood but by perseverance. On the basis of mutual benefit, in person. I chose not to respond to my parents. Rather, I sat on the living room floor in our new home encircled by wooden blocks, and the sound of children laughing. Lily brought down the towers that Liam had erected. To make cocoa, Claire went to the kitchen. Emitting light, the fireplace beckoned. It was tranquility. I was not sympathetic when Kelsey informed me, via text message later that week, that they had relocated to a rental apartment that was half the size of their lake property, had no view, and lacked granite countertops. It made me sad to think of all the time I'd squandered thinking love could be purchased with blood. I had learned a lesson from them that they had no intention of imparting. Your decision to prioritize peace is not self-centered. Who gets to remain in your life and who doesn't is a decision that you must make. No, that is not treachery. There are limits to that, and limits are the armor that love wears. Unexpected events transpired a few months after we settled into our new house. Celeste, a woman's name, sent me an email. One of the memorial web pages I created with all my heart for a friend in our grieving group whose father had died during the epidemic had been viewed by her. You have no idea who I am, but your art has given me serenity, Celeste wrote. Is that anything you may think about doing for my mom? I long for a lovely memento to honor her memory, even if I am short on resources. I jumped right in. Yes, I responded. I had come up with a fresh concept by the time Celeste's project was completed. Unbeknownst to me, one had been quietly simmering away. Could anything different have happened if these websites weren't merely services? Imagine if they had the power to cure. That evening, I sat down with a blank Word document and started to sketch up the next part of my story, Roots and Remembrance. It would be a little digital memorial studio whose sole purpose would be to provide comforting individual places for families going through a difficult time. Galleries of photographs, voice recordings, images of quotations created specifically for you. Separate areas for writing in private diaries. It began slowly with only a few of members of the bereavement support group there. However, news got out. Among my clients were bereaved families, cancer sufferers, and one parent who had lost his adolescent son in a vehicle accident. Each tale has its own unique twist. All places were holy. However, the extent to which it also helped me recover was what took me unawares. As I assisted others in digitizing their love stories, I found myself somewhat altering the conclusion of my own narrative. Sharing one's suffering makes it seem less heavy, even though it doesn't always go away. Then early on a Saturday, Diana proposed an idea that would force me to think outside of my comfort zone. Have you ever considered creating a podcast? As our children argued over a swing in the backyard, she sipped her coffee and inquired. I moaned, a podcast, really a podcast? Of course, concerning dysfunctional family relationships, return to health, a new direction, personal space, everything that you have experienced firsthand. You have a unique talent for storytelling. Their voices must be heard. First, I found it funny. Then she halted. Simply put, I had a gut feeling she was correct. I didn't get to sleep that night because I wanted to record a voice memo on my phone. Secretly, I recall the day my mom said Kelsey had auditions that week. This was her way of trying to persuade me to forget my college graduation date. That was uncooked, a bit cluttered, however it exists. Launching 2 weeks after that, Toxic Ties Stories of Boundaries and Breakthroughs kicked off its online broadcast. I was surprised that no one paid attention. On the other hand, thousands of downloads were recorded by the month's conclusion. Others wrote to me, sharing personal anecdotes. Siblings who have chosen not to communicate with one another. Young people who had severed links with their violent parents. That family is everything has been drilled into the heads of women for decades, but now they've learned that sometimes family is the wound. It was more rapid than I had anticipated that the community would expand. More than just staying alive, I felt like I was part of something greater. I presided over a healing, and then something tiny but significant happened right when I felt my life had found its new rhythm. Through my company website, I received an email from a young mother named Renee. She was having difficulty. I am single, I am unpartnered. She was alone with her kid and a mountain of sadness that she was unsure how to handle. Despite her financial constraints, she was eager to speak with me. We had coffee together. Even back then, 2 years ago, I recognized myself in her. A broken egg, I am drained, boundless energy. Consequently, I constructed a memorial web page in her honor, totally free. Her number was the one I had for Claire. Plus, I confided in her the one thing I had wished someone would tell me. There is no damage to you, you're constructing. At that same second, I had a profound epiphany. It wasn't my family's wealth that allowed me to build the legacy I was leaving behind. The one I selected was used to construct it. A single lady, a single narrative, from one survivor to another. There are things I wish someone had informed me sooner, as I look back on it now, not only at the anguish but at the journey through it. Truths that I discovered by trial and error, and maybe, just maybe, you're standing through a storm that I once did waiting for someone to let you go of what's hurting you if you're listening to this. So I'll just say it, protecting someone with blood doesn't work. Family is everything. Our teachers instill in us the sacredness of this concept, damn solid. But here's the unpopular truth. Often the most hurtful individuals are those who share your last name, not total strangers. Additionally, you have the right to distance yourself from someone who brings you feelings of insignificance, forgetfulness, or unworthiness. No matter how much DNA you share with them, having clear boundaries is not unkind. They are very clear. For my parents, my statement of no more was an act of betrayal. They claimed I lacked compassion, curious but without appreciation. Yet the reality, we safeguard our tranquility by establishing limits. We say this far, no further with them. Setting one could trigger an earthquake, but that's only because the ground you've been standing on was never stable. Even without the individuals you considered essential, you will be able to exist. Raising twins on my own seemed like an overwhelming task. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to cope with my grief on my own. Still, I realized that ties to a community aren't necessarily passed down through generations. Sometimes they're created by means of mercy, with bravery. In this way, put yourself out there first, and the proper people will discover you. You are not defined by your pain. Use it whatever you choose. I could have allowed resentment to grow. I might have allowed their treachery to take center stage in my narrative. However, I put it to use as fuel instead. For both myself and others, I transformed suffering into healing. Then what about that? It's powerful. When I told them no, it was really a yes from me. To relaxation, yes. Peace, yes. Parenting with presence rather than anger is the way to go. Even if it didn't resemble my ideal family, I was still committed to creating something genuine. If you're still on the fence about breaking up with folks that disappoint you, then listen. Taking care of other people's messes is not your responsibility. Putting yourself first is not selfish. Your demand for space is very normal. Do not feel alone. You're creating an improved product, one brick at a time, option by option. Plus, once it's finished, it will belong to you. Far from flawless, however it exists, a family like that stays together for a long time.